Well, folks, let's go ahead and jump in. Matt Stamper here. I am thrilled to have Anand here with us from Armorblox. And when we start thinking about the scourge that is phishing, spear phishing, all the susceptibilities that we have in our organizations with respect to email, this topic literally could not be more important for the security and resilience of our organization. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll keep a chat or keep an eye on the chat for any questions that come in, and I'll probably pepper you from time to time as well. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you all for signing in. Given it's a lunch hour, I thought I'd do it as a lunch and learn rather than pitch you about Armorblox and tell you yet another vendor pitch. I thought we'd start on a topic that's very close to our heart in terms of how attackers compromise employees and compromise us as human beings. What are the kind of things for us to watch out for? So make it educational so you learn something from this. And at the very end, I do have one slide or so about the company, but I'm not going to talk too much about the company unless you want to follow up later on with me. With that context, let me get started with introducing who we are as an organization. Right? So Armorblox is in the email security space, but more importantly, what we saw was consistently we are seeing humans fall prey to phishing attacks. Independent of the number of times you might have done phishing awareness training, independent of number of sessions that an employee has been in, it continues to be a challenge, right? So why do we still care about phishing in 2022? It's been so many years that we've been talking about this. Email security as a category has been there for more than 20 years. Why is this still a problem, right? And these statistics, this is one of the big reasons why we started Armorblox. The numbers just don't seem to come down. It's going up exponentially. If you see the latest IC3 report from the FBI, the number is 43 and change $billion, but yeah, close enough to 48, unfortunately. Over the last few years, last 3-4 years, exposed dollar losses stands at about $48 billion. And another shocking statistic around this is that right about 30% of this goes to bank accounts associated with known terrorist organizations. So here you have some emails that are coming through into organizations where, because we're not being careful, because people want to act quickly and respond to requests that they're getting, especially during these COVID times when we are working remotely, organizations end up giving up money to attackers. And it's as simple as that. So one of the interesting statistics we found in the last 12 to 18 months is, if you think back to the start of COVID, ransomware was the #1 cyber insurance claim that's being requested. So we've been targeting insurance carriers and brokers and underwriters. Ransomware is #3 right now. The #1 cyber insurance claim is business email compromise. And the #2, which is the new entrant in the top 3, is vendor fraud or supply chain attacks or invoice fraud, wire fraud, as it's differently called, right? And all of that money is being lost because someone read an email, clicked a link, or responded to it, and engaged with someone they thought it was somebody that they work with, but it did not end up being that person. And if you think about it just globally, there's about 4.5 billion email users worldwide, of whom 3 billion people use it for work, right? So that's the scope of the challenge. And the other scary statistic around this is that almost every business workflow that you can think of still happens within your emails. If it's onboarding of a new employee, if it's signing some contracts, negotiating deals and closing it with customers, finance sending out updates both to internal employees like a payroll update, or externally to other organizations, or marketing or R&D. Email still runs organizations. And there is an email footprint for every business workflow that you have inside of the organization, right? And of all the business workflows we have, and this is something that for us to remember and take back with us, right? Attackers focus on 4 kinds of critical business workflows. So if Matt and I work together and we are discussing going and watching a baseball game this weekend, attackers really don't care about that, right? What they really look forward to is they look forward to 4 kinds of threats, right? One is workflows that involve money. So a payment request, an invoice coming in, a wire transfer request, or an employee requesting a payroll update, or even, those, hey, go buy me an iTunes gift card kind of email. That is a financial transaction. The second workflow attackers look at is those that involve credentials. And you would have seen these emails. Hey, your Office 365 password needs to be reset. Or your account has reached a storage limit. Click here to extend your storage, right? Or you should have seen the news today, you saw that Dropbox got breached. And it was an attacker impersonating Circle CI, which is one of the CI/CD vendors they use. And it was asking engineers to log in into GitHub, and it was stealing their credentials. So that's the second kind of business workflow. Third, and the fourth involved data. So third is emails that involve sensitive data, so PII, PCI passwords. And the last is intellectual property. And these all happen in our emails. As you're looking through this, I'm sure you can identify 10, 12 workflows that you probably did today before this session, which fall into these 4 buckets, right? And that is why we still care about phishing in 2022. Because so much of how we operate as a business, as organizations, as human beings, happen over email in the context of our workplace. And that's the important piece. And here is where I'm a big fan of behavioral economics, and the book, the title is at the bottom of the slide, Danny Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a difficult book to read. It's not an easy book. I'll give it that much. But one of the key concepts in that book is how a brain operates in at least 2 fundamentally different modes of operation. There is system 1 thinking and system 2 thinking. System 2 thinking is what happens when you're sitting in a class like this, right? When you're in a lecture hall, when you're listening to a 2-hour security awareness training video. That's where our brain is. It's slow, it's methodical, it's rational. You see a video of somebody falling victim to a kind of a phishing attack, and you're like, oh, of course not, I'm not going to do that, right? Your rational brain is thinking through that. System 1, unfortunately, is where our brain is during the work hours where we are. We have a slew of emails to respond to. We are getting notifications on Slack or Teams or wherever it is. Even now, I'm sure some of you are probably grabbing a bite of your lunch while listening to me and responding to something on Slack, right? So brain is in the fast, emotional, instinctive aspect of how it operates. And unfortunately, things that are obvious to our brain in the system 1 don't always translate, in system 2, don't always translate into the system 1 brain. And a shocking statistic will actually explain this. Like if phishing awareness companies have done these surveys, and they found that even after 5 consecutive security awareness training classes, 1 out of 7 employees still end up clicking on that link that they should not be clicking on. So your gains out of purely simulation and training taper off, right? And why is that? And that's where the rest of the slides will focus on, right? Why is it that attackers are continuously able to compromise people, right? And here is a quick question on that, right? Very quick, you shouldn't think too much, right? Bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. What is the cost of the ball, right? If you're given 5 seconds to respond to this, many of us that maybe have not done problems like this in many years, will probably say, yeah, the bat is $1 and the ball is 10 cents, right? You don't come up with this answer, right? And that's because of just how our brain does math and how our brain thinks about loss and gain and things like that, and how our brain does computations, right? So in the next few slides, I want to focus on 5 different cognitive biases and how attackers use each one of these to compromise us into believing that what they're requesting is true, right? We're going to talk about halo effect, hyperbolic discounting, curiosity effect, recency effect, and authority bias. And we're going to walk through each one of these. And as we go through them, feel free to, doesn't have to be a question. If you have a comment to add around any one of these things, feel free to add that in the chat as well. The halo effect is something, as it says, it is actually, there's a book with this title called Halo Effect, which is slightly different, but it's also an interesting book. The attacker is trying to impersonate a brand that we know is a well-known brand. And it's a workflow that we are used to. During COVID days, we get a lot of packages coming in, FedEx, UPS, all of that, right? So we are accustomed to seeing these emails. Now, instinctively, we trust that if there is a logo and a big brand represented in the email, it is legitimate. And we end up believing what the email says. Same with credit card emails that we get in our work emails. And we've seen a spike of this during the COVID years because we do more of our business online. So that's one example. The second one is hyperbolic discounting. I don't know if all of you have seen this. I get this once every few months. There's a huge discount running on Ray-Ban glasses. Click here, refer 5 of your friends, and you get Ray-Bans for free, right? And hyperbolic discounting is a really interesting concept as well, in the sense that as human beings, we end up discounting the pain we have to endure in the future for immediate gains that we have, right? So something that is something like what you see in the rear view mirror, right? Objects in the in the rearview mirror might be closer than they appear. So you're not thinking about the consequences of doing something right now because you get an immediate benefit, and that's what the attacker claims. And you forget about, okay, what do you have to give up to get that immediate benefit? And there's a lot of these scams like this, especially be prepared for a slew of these a week from now, as or maybe even already, as Thanksgiving shopping and Black Friday deals and discounts, all of that start showing up. Curiosity effect. And this is something where it really hurts us as human beings to think about, hey, this seems legitimate. Why is this happening this way, right? And the way they try to do this is a usual business workflow that we have seen in our email, but it says something is wrong with that workflow. Oh, your account has been locked, your bank account. And you're in the middle of the workday, you're like, oh, what happened? Why is my bank account locked, right? Or you didn't pay your phone bill and you're going to cancel your phone line tomorrow, or your power bill, or whatever it is, right? So those are workflows that we know, and we know how customer service is in some of these organizations where without telling us, they might just cut something out. So instantly we are curious. And because we are switching context among so many different things, we may not spend that extra 30 seconds to see if this is a legitimate email or not. And the classic way in which we fall victim is to click on the link that the email says. So the email might say online.wellsfargo.com in the text, but if you hover on that, the link is going somewhere else, right? But the email might give you a phone number to call, which is not the real phone number for the company. And because we don't want to take that extra effort to go look at the legitimate website to find the number, we just call the number in there. One of the customers we signed up, a public company, the way we got them to sign up was during our demo with them. They had received one of these emails with a number. We actually texted that number, and the attacker was engaging with us live, pretending to be the CEO of a public company, asking an employee in the security organization to do something that they should not be doing, right? So curiosity with quick responses without really going deeper into things can really create problems like this. The other one is the recency effect. And unfortunately, attackers, here is where attackers really compromise ongoing disasters and crises in the macroeconomic scenario, right? So when COVID started, we saw a lot of these small business scams, COVID announcements that employees feel like they should go read, and they end up compromising their credentials. More recently, as hurricane season hits, every time we see a spike in these, where attackers are using macroeconomic adverse events to their benefit. So something that's very topical recently happened, it's top of mind, we end up going and clicking on that. As election and voting season comes in, that's a very common thing as well that they use to make you go to websites where you're asked to enter your credentials to read something that is related to the elections, and you end up losing your credentials. And also because so many of our applications ask us to authorize so many times, we are kind of numb to that, right? And the same thing happens in the 2FA world as well. Attackers do a flood of 2FA notifications, and you're like, oh yeah, maybe one of my applications is requesting this, let me just say yes. And the last one here is authority bias. And here is where wanting to be a good employee, wanting to be a good corporate citizen, MFA fatigue is being, And there's an interesting slew of new startups that are coming up that are going to add thresholds to these MFA notifications and things like that. So that's something you're going to see soon. So the authority bias is, I want to be a good corporate employee. I want to make sure that I respond to my manager or my VP or my CEO in a quick fashion. And that's what the attacker ends up abusing. So there's a few really interesting scams that are going on. If an attacker is focused on your organization, they have APIs into LinkedIn to know when an employee has updated their profile to say they just joined the company. And what we are seeing is within 1 to 2 weeks, the employee, so they scrape the employee's information through public sites and through the dark web to get their cell phone numbers and their personal email addresses. And they get a notification either on their cell phone or on their personal email, pretending to be the CEO of the company or an executive in the company, asking them to do something. So I'm a new employee, I just joined this company, I'm getting a text from somebody who says is the CEO, I want to respond right away. And they end up compromising the organization that way. And they target people that have access to one of these 4 workflows, right? People in the IT department that have admin credentials, or people in the finance department that have the authorization to send out wires. That's where they get the most leverage out of that. So in your organizations, do watch out for that. We are seeing a lot of those campaigns in the recent past, where LinkedIn is being scraped actively to do these campaigns. And the other tendency we see in the market in the recent past few years is just end up blaming the employees. Oh, employees are stupid, pardon my language, but they don't know what they're doing, and we have to constantly keep training them, otherwise they'll never get better, right? There's some element of truth to the fact that employees are not technical enough to know some of these detailed nitty-gritties. But if you survey every employee in an organization, an incredibly high number of people say that they want to be good corporate citizens. Nobody says, oh, I'm going to click on everything. It's not my job to investigate what this is, right? But the problem is technology has to get better at educating them on how can technology stop a lot of these attacks or warn them before they take an adverse action, right? And that's where understanding more and more signals around how an organization communicates becomes important, right? Offload the system to thinking to the machines, so that when we do the system one work, when our brain is actively engaged in emails, the machine can interrupt and help us understand if something is good or bad, right? And that's kind of where the future of email security is headed, and that's where we come in, right? Where what we are talking about is leave no signals behind. And when you take an email and when you take an organization, there's at least 3 kinds of signals, in-depth signals that you can get. The first is around who users are, people's identities. So we can look at historical emails and automatically build identity profiles for people, names, titles, departments, Active Directory groups they're part of. You can inherit all of that, right? The second bucket is user behavior. So who do I communicate with? What domains? How often do I communicate with them? Is it symmetric or not? Is it a marketing guy hitting you with 100 emails? Or are you also responding back to them and engaging with them, right? Reputations of those domains. All of that goes into the behavior bucket. And the last one, and the most important one, if you ask me, is the language in the emails, right? What is being discussed? Is there a wire transfer request? Is there urgency in the conversation? Is somebody asking for credentials? All of that goes into the language in the emails. Once you know that, this is a rich set of information with which you can alert users, right? And what you can do with that is you can add contextual warning banners. Now think of your email client. Think of the email solutions that you use right now. Usually you get one of 2 kinds of warnings. One is you get an external tag in your email, and most of you, probably 90% of your emails have that external tag. Guess what? Our brain is really good at removing redundant information, whether we like it or not. I can guarantee you that 90% of the time when you read an email, you're not even processing that external tag. Your brain just tunes it up, right? The second thing we see is a very generic banner that says, hey, you know what? This could be external, this could be suspicious, exercise caution. Now, I might see that in 10 emails and focus on that, but beyond 10 emails during a day, I'm not even going to look at that, right? And as email security products, we can do better. So what Armorblox tries to do, for example, is to have very, very specific warning banners that call out, hey, this is a credential phishing email. And hopefully that would have been deleted. You don't even need a warning banner. Or this is an invoice fraud. This seems like a potentially fake invoice, right? Or this is a payroll fraud, or this is an executive impersonation. There is a malicious attachment in this email. So if I'm an employee, instead of sitting in classes and learning about what an attack would look like, or just focusing on simulated campaigns where I'm getting a fake email, bad email, these are in-context education in real bad emails that employees get, right? And that's the big value of doing something like this, that in-context education of employees. Across our customers, what we are seeing is fewer simulation campaigns happening over time once they have something like this in place. In fact, I have one customer that has completely stopped phishing simulation campaigns entirely, saying that this suffices from an education perspective. And they're also seeing better employee response when it comes to not falling victim for the few emails that slip through when we are in place, right? So that's where, when you combine an understanding of behavioral economics and how you design an email security solution, and you bring in the latest in language technologies, that's where something like this can be done, right? And that's my last slide, and I'll open it up for questions in the last 10 minutes that we have. But we look at about 4 billion emails a month. We process, yes, thanks, Matt. Your NPS score is a 98.6 on 100. My board says that even a cute puppy doesn't get a 98.6. How did you guys?
I love it.
So yeah, customers are a true north. We get a lot of feedback from them. From a scale perspective, we look at about 3.5 to 4 billion emails a month. There's about 600,000 threats we stop actively. Very easy to set up. It's API-based, one-click authorize and connect. And that's who we are. We can connect into on-prem Exchange, Microsoft Online, as well as Exchange, Office 365, as well as Google Workspace.
And there's a good question in there from Chris Forbes. Does Armorblox have the ability to review legacy emails to see if there are dangerous emails previously received that were not blocked?
Yeah, great question. And from the early days, yes, we've had that. And the reason is, security industry in general is suspicious of vendors that promise machine learning. I know that personally. I start conversation with CISOs that way. So the first thing we do when we engage with an organization for a proof of value is we look at 3 months of historical data and we give them a findings review where we say, look, in the last 3 months, these are all bad emails that are still sitting around in your employees' inboxes. And the scary thing is sometimes we see employees engaging with attackers where there is a payroll change that has happened. And literally halfway through the call, somebody in the security team says, sorry, I need to drop off. I need to go talk to that person in payroll to see if this money actually was transacted or not. We see a lot of those. We work with very large university systems where even during the POV, we see active account takeover attempts because there are professors inside universities that just don't want to sit in the security awareness class and they click on the links all the time, right? So we do provide a historical look back and show dangerous emails.
It'd be interesting to hear how you brought in behavioral economics, behavioral sciences, cognitive sciences as a fresh way to look at some of the challenges with respect to email security, because I strongly agree that when you start to do that kind of connective tissue between unrelated disciplines and find out where they're actually more valuable in kind of a combined fashion, we get these new, really appropriate, innovative solutions to legacy problems. I would love to hear that kind of origin story, if you will, how you brought that in.
Yeah. So when DJ, my co-founder, who's our CEO, when DJ and I met in the summer of 2017, and we were thinking about what security product to build, what pain point to solve for, email security, we started off being skeptical. We were like, Proofpoint exists, Mimecast says it's a 20-year-old industry. Why should we build another company, right? And then you always look back in your personal lives and see, okay, in the personal life, is there any new tech that has come in that is not yet in the enterprise world, right? And if you look at how we access information in our personal lives, it has gone from sitting in the reference section in a library and taking notes from a book because you can't check it out, to encyclopedias and big floppy disks, to smaller floppy disks, to Alta Vista, and then to Google, to these days, people just ask Alexa a question and they get a response back, right? So language-based interfaces have changed how our personal lives access information. We wanted to bring that into cybersecurity. So that was the first insight for us. And the second insight was talking to security teams to understand, okay, what are the challenges faced with the current secure email gateway solutions, right? Why is this not working? And that's when we realized that the nature of attacks has fundamentally shifted in the last 10 years, where the approach with which you were doing inline secure email gateways could not accommodate some of these ways in which you're doing machine learning and deep learning and AI-based approaches, right? When attacks become more about compromising the human and not compromising the application infrastructure, like sending a credential phishing link or a malicious attachment, you really have to understand, okay, if the human brain were a machine, what are the ways in which it's vulnerable, right? And that's where the behavioral economics aspect of it comes in.
Yeah. And then where does Armorblox get data on sender reputation? Does this rely on DMARC, DKIM, SPF, et cetera?
Yeah, so we do both, Chris. So we subscribe to a lot of reputation feeds like Webroot and other things. In addition to that, we also do full DMARC, DKIM, SPF detection and verify if they are passing or failing. Unfortunately, DMARC itself has not been widely adopted as a standard. So just because DMARC passed, it doesn't mean an email is safe. Like I could send it from a gmail.com and it would pass. And conversely, many vendors haven't implemented DMARC properly yet. So I might be working with a small business who is a legitimate vendor, but they have not had the IT team to go set up DMARC for them. But yes, to the extent that it's an additional signal that we look at, we do look at DMARC, DKIM, and SPF as well.
And the other thing I liked is in the previous slide where you kind of walk through type 1 and type 2 thinking. I think it's really important when we see that, it makes us literally take pause and stop and think about, the nature and extent of what we're up against. And there's a reason why so many security breaches and incidents occur during holidays. Wink, wink, nod, nod. We're heading into holiday season. So we all need to be kind of primed to expect these types of things. And when we're under periods of high stress, lots of activity, multitasking, et cetera, it's so critical that we literally get up above the fray from time to time, rethink things through, and kind of do that more system 2 thinking. But the reality is that we live in a fast-paced system 1 world. And with our inbox being kind of the fast lane of all the different stuff that comes in, I think this is such an important way of really looking at this. How can we bring system 2 thinking into a system 1 world?
Yeah. So one of the things we've been doing is with our customer base, we are actively involved in their security education for the customers as well. So a very large Fortune 50 retailer is a customer of ours, and they were going through their cybersecurity awareness training month. So we did a webinar for all of their employees where we actually went through a very similar exercise to educate the employees on what to look out for. Can Armorblox feed a SIM or a UBA platform? Yes, absolutely. We can, all of the intel that Armorblox collects out of all the threats that we stop can be fed over APIs into almost any downstream platform. So yes, that can be done too.
As a follow-on to Chris's point, how many individuals interacted with X message, that type of capability.
Correct. Yep, that also goes in. So yeah, clicking is one. It's also user responding to it. Like for example, a gift card email or a payroll fraud email that, let's say it was quarantined and somebody ended up responding to it. We still track all of that, and that statistic can be provided as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Any other questions from the individuals watching the session today? I thought, Anand, the point vis-a-vis all the different kind of cognitive biases in the nature and extent of those, just bringing that into how we look at these issues is so critical. I think this is truly, in my view, kind of a masterclass on these types of issues. We don't really take pause and think about how our own perceptions of the world may impact our ability to make our organizations better governed, more secure, more resilient. And I think even just painting these out there really change how we look at the challenges of email as unfortunately kind of the ubiquitous enterprise app.
Right. Yeah. And as people look at not just individual attack types, but more around categories of the kinds of attacks, so our brain is able to understand it better if we can process in each of these categories, right? So why are we falling victim to each of these makes us more cognizant of these kinds of attempts when we see those emails in our daily lives.
And Dave has a great question more from a competitive perspective in the marketplace, how are you distinct and separate?
Yeah. I want to be mindful of not bad-mouthing any vendors out there. There's a lot of good products out there. One of the good things you're seeing in email security is there is a revamp of the space happening in the last 5 years, 6 years, a lot of new vendors coming up. The ways in which we are fundamentally different is that we're built as a platform that can go beyond email as well. So next year, you'll see us connecting into file sharing and messaging and other channels. Language is a very, very strong vector for us, unlike some of the other ones, where we are very, very squarely focused on natural language techniques, deep learning. So a fundamentally different way to look at emails. We're also API-based, which unlike the legacy vendors. So it falls into that ICES category that Gartner has. We are fairly broad in what we support. So for example, as an API-based vendor, we can also connect to on-premise Exchange. So we have customers that have a fully hybrid deployment where they have on-premise Exchange, Office 365, and Google Workspace. We can connect across all of that. And for very large customers that we have, we can fully deploy inside of their environment as well. So think about federal clients, think about the Fortune 20, think about top banks. They don't want to send their emails into a startup's cloud. We can fully deploy inside of their own environment as well.
Excellent. And I think the last question, another one from Chris there, about providing insight back to the hosting providers.
Yeah. We do that already. We've been doing that for a couple of years.
Well, fantastic. First and foremost, kudos to what you're building. I love the innovation. I love bringing in behavioral economics, cognitive sciences into this, and kind of the language processing dynamic as well. Really drives innovation and helps us tackle some of the really distinct challenges we face, especially around email security. So thank you for a fantastic presentation today. Yeah.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you all for attending during your lunch slot. I really appreciate it and hope you learned something in this.